All right, cool. So I've only got about 30 hours in this game. Not much of a big gamer, but I was inspired by another just random video that came up sometime back where a guy said he made anarchy in this game. So I ended up buying this game. Um, I had an old laptop that was in no means designed for gaming. Some years ago, I uploaded a couple like EVE Online tutorials. I played like 600 hours of EVE on that computer that was in no way meant for gaming. um, it ran on the lowest settings though, but so maybe I'll put a little video game stuff here and there. Now I've got to end up getting a better computer. This game's obviously not that demanding, but hadn't posted in a while. Thought this would be cool. Like I say, pretty cool game. Obviously not the best representation. I still have a state technically, so I'm not actually in anarchy, so to speak. But the fact that they have Austrian economists in here as advisors is already pretty awesome. Maybe this is more represented than I know. Like I say, I don't play games much. I've seen a couple other kind of cool world, like super in-depth risk type games. Basically, I can't remember what any of them are called, but those seem pretty cool. I like strategy and simulation games a lot. That Stellaris game is pretty awesome too. I have not played that game yet, but it looks pretty awesome anyway. But so Liberty, the city of Liberty, Liberty City, whatever you want to say, in Freeland. It's interesting. I don't have a 100 index, freedom index. I'm not sure why that is. All of my policies were the complete laissez-faire example or option rather. Interesting. Civil rights index is only 12. That's kind of unfortunate. Certain things seem to be, obviously behind up. You don't unlock them until you get a certain civil rights score. But it's interesting because it does make perfect sense, since anarchists technically, logically, wouldn't believe in so-called civil rights. Like, I don't believe in civil rights. That's nonsense. That's basically just state speak, right? That's what the state says your rights are. So it would make sense that they're 12, but it's unfortunate, and I think that's just part of it. Maybe the people who made this game, or the person, I'm not sure, understood that, and they were just like, well, that's the way the world works because people believe in statism, or maybe it just kind of was baked into the game because they themselves perceive the world as such. Technically people do act as such, right? That's what they act. Civil rights are the so-called permissions that the state has granted by legislation. So, allegedly anyway. But civil rights are nonsense. So it does make sense that that's low, but it is unfortunate that it seems to block certain mechanics of the game, because people seem to equate civil rights with like good things, basically. Like, it's when the state recognizes your rights, and it's like, well, that's not exactly what it is, because a lot of that's actually not at all what it is. It's a complete inversion of the concept of inalienable rights, more or less. Most especially in obvious examples from a libertarian perspective, where the so-called civil rights would overrule, allegedly, according to the state, and by their use of force, would be then violating our so-called inalienable rights, where they contradict, right? When civil rights contradict what would normally be called inalienable rights, or what some people might call human rights. I like to use that term a lot with people who, so-called lefties and stuff. They seem to they disavow the whole concept of rights, allegedly, but then they still think it's wrong, so-called, to do certain things to people, right? Like, they would say slavery is wrong, and it's like, well, would you say that's a violation of their human rights? And it's basically the same thing, right? Because we would say, we as libertarians or anarchists, I think anarchist is the more accurate term. People would say I'm not an anarchist or whatever, but because I believe in free markets and property rights, and it's just, that doesn't make any sense. But anyway, anyway, okay, exchange rate looked kind of cool. It's just interesting that um, unemployment's at 1. I'm kind of bouncing back and forth. A lot of different thoughts in my head, but GDP per capita, no, not too bad, I guess. Depends on what you're going for, but I guess let's just get into this. So, I wish I would have done this piece by piece, because I've tried to do this a couple times before, and I always had a bunch of riots, because I'm pretty sure in the video that inspired me to do this from Guy, I'll probably link it. Well, I should link it. Go back and put the link to it, but it seems like they always start off with just kind of like a regular so-called centrist government, and then they try to like scale back. Obviously, I've actually scaled up my spending, but I've never really had to mess with my taxes too much. I probably had to tinker with them a few times because people were getting a little upset about this and that. But again, obviously that's not anarchism. That's not a stateless society. It literally has taxes and state spending. It's a video game, though. Again, it gets high marks for even just having Hayek and Friedman and von Mises, especially in here. So, and it does seem to have a pretty decent market mechanic. Like it does seem to represent how markets work. Now, if you go in here, I thought this was interesting that my population is pretty much split between middle and lower. There's more middle than there are lower by a bit there, and there's only like 12% upper income, and it's interesting to me because, again, I recognize it's a video game, but when you look at free market societies or societies that have more so-called freer markets, capital tends to be more widely dispersed amongst the population, and there's higher mobility and stuff like that. This looks like there's not too much mobility to go up, but in the same sense, some people would say that's a good thing because they'd say, well, look, the capitalists can't take over, markets equilibrate, or markets equalize rather, the disbursement of capital, right? So nobody can get too so-called rich, and that's kind of true. And that would be more like to say to a socialist or something. And then the other side, though, they might say, well, look, and you can't get rich. See, government is what gives a prosperous society. And it's, of course, that statement itself is false. It's interesting that, again, I'm not sure exactly who made this, or there are clearly some flaws in, there might not be flaws in how the world works or in a representation of the world, because people do believe this stuff, and so if you start like taking away their so-called civil rights, yeah, they're going to be upset about that because people believe that when the state writes it down, it's a right. You should do this. This is the thing to do. It's noble. You're violating my so-called civil rights. It's complete nonsense, of course, when it is. Sometimes it's not. Like if somebody were to say, you're violating my civil right to property, it's like, okay, that the civil part's the part that doesn't make sense, but you are essentially correct that somebody would be violating your right to property if they stole your car or something like this, right? So, or any other example. But so I'm not sure, I'd like to aim for like a third on each of those, but I mean, I don't know. Aiming for anything just kind of seems like I shouldn't be thinking that way, right? Like, of course, I am essentially government in the game. I'm the one who has to build all the residential plots and stuff, so, but pretty cool. It'd be interesting to see somebody take that to, I mean, what would be the point of that game, right? It would just be like a chaos simulator. If you're from your point of view, like if you have absolutely no control over any of this, you would just be like a guy building a house, and then maybe you can build a business. Might not make for a very fun city builder game, but if you were like total anarchy, but because like I say, I'm the one who's got to make sure that the migrants and stuff can get secure housing by building the residential lots and stuff. I haven't messed with the migrants, so like here's some right here. Like that's technically because I try to be aside from this stuff, which you just kind of got to do in the game to keep people from rioting. I haven't had any riots in this game, and I've only chosen laissez-faire. I've always ran the government at about a little bit of a surplus. But it's never been more than like a couple grand. And if it is get a little higher, I'll put a little bit in there, and then I'll in the general fund rather. This is the only city I've built, but just kick it in there for when I build another one, and then I'll kind of manage this stuff a little bit. But I don't think I've ever had anything higher than this. Maybe I think I had middle income taxes a little bit higher than before this, but eventually I just marked that down. And it's interesting because, like I was, every time I've tried to do this before, but I always had like just a regular government, like, okay, government do this, government do that, and then I would try to scale it back, and it never seemed to work. But this time I did it, I just was like, well, obviously I'm just going to stay as laissez-faire as possible the whole time through. The reason I did the government thing was I'm pretty sure that's what the guy in the video did, and it seemed like, well, that makes sense. I got to make sure, because the first few times I did it, when I guess I didn't understand how the game worked as much, it was a lot harder being completely laissez-faire. and especially trying to keep taxes lower than that. But uh, I was able to. I never had to increase taxes, but I was able to increase spending because the government coffer was just like getting filled because the economy was booming. And in a sense, and of course that makes perfect sense. It's even like if you think about the people who say they want small taxes, but they still want a government. I like to argue against them as an anarchist, saying like, well, I don't want the state to have money. Like basically, what you're doing is you're giving people more of an incentive by lowering the price, so-called, of taxes. People are going to be more inclined to pay them. If taxes are higher, maybe they're more inclined to keep stuff under the table. Some people make that argument as a so-called accelerationist point, where it's like, you know, that could foster in the collapse of the state sooner because people will get fed up quicker and stuff. But I don't think that makes too much sense. Because in the meantime, people are still getting clobbered and killed and robbed and stuff. So, but yeah, I didn't really do much in the states in the managing of the taxes and stuff. I just kind of kept it all where it was at. I think I had maybe lower income at 7 or 6, and they were getting pissed. So I was like, well, I'll just lower it to 5, and I adjusted just a couple other things. I think I actually lowered spending to compensate for that in security and justice, and then it just kind of evened out. When I was doing it before, my approval rate I would always have riots. It would get super low. When I did it that way, it just it would go down to like 37, 36, and then the economy was just banging so hard that went away pretty quick. And so I've been steady at like 40 and stuff, 42. I'm not sure the highest I've ever been, but yeah, the only state-owned things are the stuff that has to be, which is the steelworks, the refinery and stuff. These are all private. I didn't have to do anything except light taxation to get money from the state, or money for the state to continue building. And now you can see I've got year 52, pretty good amount of money there, and I put however much into the fund here. I've never messed with this. I've kept that completely balanced. I didn't incentivize or restrict. I think I built one like government building. I think I built the bunker house because I thought that was funny. I'm not sure, but yeah, but it worked out pretty good. So this is a pretty awesome game. The unemployment's probably a little bit lower than I'd like, so I have to go in and build residential, but pretty good representation of the ideas here, I would say. What is going on with this? Get rid of that. Whatever. There's my regional fund, yeah. Shared so far. I'm not sure what that's telling me, but yeah, I have like $500,000 in there too. So that's cool. When I build another city, if our comrades ever need assistance, we got a communal pot going for you, man. I think I said this, but yeah, I didn't ever mess with the migrants because that's their property now. They have homesteaded that. Nobody else built on it yet. I think that's I think one time. Well, I know one time, I'm not sure where, but it was somewhere over here. I was middle of building, and I went and did something else and came back, and they popped up. So I was like, I'm sorry, dudes, I got to get rid of this because, technically we were developing this. So that one was okay. I'm not trying to victimize the poor and stuff. I need to build them houses to so that they can, and a couple businesses and commercial plots and stuff, rather. But yeah, definitely recommend this game if you've never played it and got a little time to kill. Quality of life is fair. I think I've had it better than that. I did try to do a libertarian socialist one also, where I was basically laissez-faire on all the so-called social policies. I didn't restrict drugs or anything like that. Unfortunately, I had to restrict foreign investment. I didn't have to, but it seemed like that made the most sense because everything was basically, government housing. I was just trying to envision it as a completely voluntary society and not a state. So it was just like, okay, everybody agrees on this. They all came here with the original intent of building this voluntary commune, yeah, but it didn't work out too good. And I kind of gave up because I was less interested in that than this. But I haven't tinkered around with it too much, man. This street is booming over here. Look at all these people to and fro, making those tax dollars for the government. Maybe I'll run another one where I'll just reload this and then just get rid of everything and see what happens. I'm sure it'll turn into freaking madness because, you know, I probably could do it like really slowly. We'll see. I don't know. Like get rid of this, then get rid of some spending, some taxation at the same time. Obviously, I can only go so far because this starts going down. Your stability starts going down when you start messing with the taxes. So, yeah, I don't know. We'll see how that goes. I guess I'll probably do that. I'll probably have to build a little bit more housing and some sort of job potential for the people. So, and then I can slash everything and just see what happens. But based on the mechanics of the game, I don't think that they were complete philosophical anarchists, because obviously they would realize that that doesn't make any sense allowing me to have the tag anarchy when I still have taxes and stuff. But so I'm going to assume that people are going to start rioting and things, which is not unrealistic. It's just I'm not sure if that would be designed. I wonder if there's a way to do that, basically, is what I'm saying. Like, is there a way to where I can completely get rid of the state and have the society continue to prosper, potentially anyway? Or is it baked in that with no government spending, even with no taxes, is it just going to go into crazy mode no matter what and shit? Basically, everybody's going to start destroying their own businesses or their own communities and stuff. I don't think God would destroy his own business, but people would go out there and destroy other people's stuff. Mostly other so-called private property, as opposed to the perpetrators of it. Of course, at that point, if you're rioting because the state's getting rid of stuff, that's the wrong. That's not a good reason to take to the streets. I'll just say it that way, I guess. That's the wrong reasons, dude. The real problem at that point would be. I thought I did this. Oh yeah. Well, I'm not going to save this, but I'll give our little current iteration of Sims a little breather there, and then get through over there. Yeah, pretty cool. Pretty cool game. I guess I'll end it on that. Rant over.